Resident Evil 8 is a game filled with many iconic and bizarre enemy creations. Within the many enemies in this game entail some very dark and disturbing origins for how they came to be. From Donna Beneviento's dark past, to the tragic fate of the villagers, all the way to the terrifying enemy mutations, the truth behind the many enemies of Resident Evil 8 gets very dark and is destined to leave a chill down your spine. Here is the lore of every Resident Evil 8 enemy. Miranda was born sometime in the late 19th century in an Argarian mountain village in Eastern Europe. In 1909, she gave birth to her first and only child, Eva. In 1919, the Spanish flu made its way to the village and devastated its population. The death toll was so high that the cemetery was soon full to capacity, forcing many survivors to bury their loved ones outside of the village. Among those who perished in the pandemic was Eva, only 10 years old at the time of her death. Driven to despair, Miranda ventured into a nearby cave, where she intended to commit suicide. However, before she could end her life, she came across a massive ancient fungal super colony, which she dubbed as the Mold. Miranda touched a portion of the large mass, and in the process saw the memories of hundreds, if not thousands of people who had been consumed by the fungus over the centuries. Among those was Eva herself, whose body had been assimilated almost immediately after her burial. Believing she could use the mold to bring her lost daughter back to life, Miranda came to revere this substance as the Black God. Returning from the cave, Miranda infected several villagers with the mold, curing them of their sickness, and used the apparent miracles to proclaim herself a prophet of the Black God, soon after giving sermons at the local church. The villagers, under the mind-altering effects of the mold, quickly abandoned their Christian faith and converted to her new pagan cult, henceforth addressing Miranda as Mother. Over the next several decades, Miranda conducted research on the mold from makeshift labs beneath the village and ceremony site, where she would perform experiments into its functions and abilities. One of these experiments resulted in the creation of the Kadu, a parasitic nematode altered by the mold. Various people from peasants to nobility were implanted with these parasites as part of her studies, which sought to create a superhuman host for a copy of Eva's consciousness to manifest within, therefore giving her a second chance at life. The vast majority of test subjects failed, either dying outright or becoming Lycans. These Lycans were then cast out of the village by Miranda in order to keep the remaining townsfolk alive for future research. The Lycans ended up making their den in the ruins of a medieval fort and were treated more akin to foxes, only occasionally raiding the village to kill livestock. The most promising candidates of Miranda's Kadu experiments were the descendants of the four kings who had once ruled over the region: Alcina Dimitrescu, Karl Heisenberg, Donna Beneviento, and Salvatore Moreau. Although none were suitable vessels for Eva, Miranda recognized their ancient feudal role over the region, and they operated together as a council. At some point, Miranda began to take on the guise of an elderly woman, dubbed as the Old Hag. This form allowed her to spy on the villagers undetected, most of whom regarded her as insane. In 2000, Miranda was approached by the crime syndicate The Connections, who had been made aware of her research and wished to collaborate with her. Miranda provided them with a sample of the mold and an embryonic clone of Eva. The Connections themselves were working on a human BOW project that could brainwash enemy combatants, and believed that the mold could assist in this process. With the embryo, they were able to produce a number of prototypes, with Miranda herself overseeing the development of Eveline, the first of their E-type, created at some point before 2014. Miranda met Eveline in person alongside with her assigned handlers, Mia Winters and Alan Droney. When the Connections facility housing Eveline was discovered during a BSAA investigation in October of 2014, Eveline was transported across the ocean on a tanker, which then crashed off the coast of Louisiana, resulting in the Dolby incident. In early 2021, Miranda gained vital information for her goals. Eveline was killed during a BSAA operation in July of 2017, but not before infecting Mia Winters and her husband Ethan, who had since conceived a child. The Connections, who had a mole in the BSAA, were also able to provide Miranda with the family's location and the child's name, being Rose. Believing Rose was guaranteed to be the ideal host for Eva, Miranda immediately made plans to abduct her from the Winters home. On Wednesday, February 3rd, Miranda instructed a villager, Eugene, to bring her medical equipment and medicine. By Friday, Miranda had successfully abducted Mia and subjected her to unknown tests, allowing Miranda to assimilate Mia's DNA into her own body and physically transform into a duplicate of her, thereafter convincingly disguising herself as Mia to infiltrate the Winters home. Miranda pretended to be Mia for several days, with Ethan completely unaware of her true identity. Already having marital difficulties, Miranda's more confrontational behavior towards Ethan was not suspicious, and her sudden familiarity familiarity with local folklore could easily be explained away. Although Ethan was fooled, Miranda's infiltration was quickly uncovered by a counter-bioterrorism unit under the command of Captain Chris Redfield, who had been investigating Miranda since the Baker incident. Miranda was gunned down through the dining room window and shot repeatedly at close range by Redfield himself. Although conventional firearms had minimal effect on the immortal Miranda, she realized that it would be difficult to escape with Rose and instead chose to play dead. Her body was loaded into a car with Ethan and Rose and then taken away. During transit, Miranda attacked and killed both soldiers on board, causing the car to crash in a forest. From there, she grabbed Rose and made her way to the village. In the early hours of Tuesday on February 9th, Miranda held a ritual with the Four Lords in the ruins of an ancient church. There, Rose was subjected to a procedure which crystallized her body in a way that would ensure her survival even after being mutilated, with each of her body parts then being put into flasks and taken into possession by each of the lords under Miranda's orders. Rose being divided served as an insurance for the ritual. Though unbeknownst to the lords, Miranda planned to kill everyone in the region to feed the Black God and ensure the ceremony's completion, including each of the lords themselves. With the peasants' usefulness expired, Miranda unleashed the Lycans on them. By daybreak, most of the village population had either been slaughtered or transformed into Lycans. While overseeing the destruction, Miranda spotted Ethan Winters fending off an attack by the Lycans. Rather than let him die, she ordered the Lycans to retreat. Taking the form of the old hag, Miranda provided him with false information that Rose was at Castle Dimitrescu, knowing he would search for Rose there and, if all went according to plan, kill Alcina Dimitrescu, ridding herself of one of the most powerful lords of the region, while simultaneously allowing her to observe the extent of Ethan's mold infection. During her final search through the village, Miranda spotted the last survivor, Lillian, and killed him personally. Not long after, Miranda held an emergency session at the old church following Heisenberg's capture of Winters. Having either lost faith in Winters' reliability or simply pretending she did not care about his survival to avoid the Four Lords becoming suspicious of her true motives, Miranda gave in to their demands to have Ethan killed and charged Heisenberg with the task. As noon approached, she received a phone call from Alcina Dimitrescu, alerting her to Winters' presence in her castle and the death of one of her daughters, though Miranda once more decided to prohibit Ethan's execution, much to Alcina's fury. In the early afternoon, Winters escaped the castle after his slaying of the Dimitrescu bloodline and ran into Miranda in an underground shrine beneath the ceremony site. In her old hag form once more, Miranda teased her knowledge of his mutant nature and sent him off in search of the other three lords, knowing for certain he would be able to dispose of them now. Over the course of the evening, Miranda became aware of a BSAA operation taking place, having been tracked back to the village by the mercenary squad Hound Wolf, led by Captain Chris Redfield. The squad set up a series of camps around the village to monitor the situation, including one within the very cave Miranda had discovered the fungal root. Moreau was alerted to the threat the BSAA posed to their plans, though was ultimately unsuccessful as he too fell to Ethan. Heisenberg himself was also aware of the BSAA's plans, though whether he learned through Miranda or on his own is uncertain. By nightfall, Winters had recovered all 4 flasks containing parts of Rose and placed them within the giant's chalice at the ceremony site. Miranda, watching him from afar, began the process of waking up the Black God, causing earthquakes to manifest as it began growing beneath the surface of the village. While Winters explored Heisenberg's factory, Miranda took possession of the chalice. As Winters and Heisenberg fought, Winters ultimately proved the victor, and with Heisenberg no longer a threat to her, Ethan had outlived his purpose, and Miranda then ripped his heart out. Miranda waited at the ceremony site as the fungal root grew more and more, destroying the eastern and southern parts of the village in the process. It was at this point BSAA Europe finally made their move, having been investigating the region independently from Redfield. This operation was not a sizable threat to her preparations, and the colony had grown to sufficient mass to produce imitation Lycans to fend off any operators on the ground. The real threat to Miranda came from Winters himself, who she discovered had mutated to possess a hyper-regenerative ability, which allowed him to survive her murder attempt, though was still in the process of dying. When confronted, Miranda continued with the ritual, but discovered to her horror that the reincorporated Rose was fighting back the super colony. As a result, Miranda, and possibly the Black God as a whole, were weakened, and Eva's consciousness failed to take over. With Winters and Redfield taking the offensive, Miranda was forced to take extreme measures and underwent a series of transformations. Having lost her regenerative ability due to Rose taking some of her power, Miranda was once more susceptible to injuries. Ultimately, Winters gained the upper hand by using this opportunity to gradually crystallize her, as her body slowly broke down from his offenses. With the final cry of Eva's name, Miranda's physical body finally crumbled, at last dying after over 100 years of life, though her consciousness became one with the Black God in the process. In a beaten and weakened state, Winters pleaded with Redfield to take Rose back to Mia and go to the escape helicopter so that he can ensure their safety. Taking Redfield's detonator, Winters charged the growing fungus and blew himself up in the process. This explosion decimated the entirety of the village, killing the remaining Lycans and ensuring Miranda's death for good. Winters died in the blast, but his death meant the world would not be harmed by Miranda anymore. Due to a fragment of the Black God being salvaged from the wreckage by BSAA, Miranda's consciousness continued to live on inside of it, surviving for years after her demise in its realm of conscious. Reiterating her determination to use Rose as a vessel for Eva, she began conducting experiments on the properties of the Black God by cultivating different realms in its stratums, each mimicking areas of the village she once ruled, including Castle Dimitrescu and House Beneviento, mixing and manipulating the consciousness stored within the Black God to create entities who would further her research. Her first creation was a warped, sadistic version of the Duke, the merchant of the village who had previously conducted business dealings with her and the Four Lords. In her attempts to make duplicates of Rose, all would result in failure, as the Rose copies were merely husks without the true Rose powers. Miranda began plotting to bring the real Rose into the realm of consciousness by manipulating her through her mold infection. With the real Rose now a teenager desperate to relinquish her powers due to her overwhelmingly strong abilities, Miranda projected an illusion in her mind of her family friend and colleague Charlie Graham to exploit Rose's traumatic childhood as an outcast and victim of bullying. Using the Charlie illusion to guide Rose into entering the salvaged fungal root fragment and the Black God's realm of consciousness, Miranda convinced her that within it she would find a purifying crystal able to remove her powers. However, Miranda's plan was interrupted by Ethan Winters, whose own consciousness had become a helpful guide for Rose in evading and foiling the Duke's traps. After Rose retrieved the crystal, purifying herself of her powers, Miranda at last revealed herself and her intentions, much to Rose's horror. With Ethan interfering to help Rose escape, Miranda engaged in a final battle with him, nearly erasing his consciousness in the process. Unable to lose the last trace of her father and her connection to him, Rose destroyed the crystal to regain control of her abilities and fight Miranda, overpowering her to save her father. In one last scream of her daughter's name, Miranda's consciousness crumbled to dust, at last erasing her from existence. The Four Houses' origins lie in ancient times, with four men who founded one of Europe's earliest settlements. An unknown catastrophe befell the region, leading to the disappearance of its inhabitants and its abandonment, until a village was established on the surface of the fallen ruins. By the 15th century, rule over the region passed on to the descendants of the four men, House Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Moreau, and Beneviento. The direct connections between the four houses and their ancient cohorts are unspecified, though they likely represent a line of noble descent. These houses prospered in the 20th century, though their feudal domination appears to have waned over time. At some point before the turn of the 20th century, Miranda took over the village by presenting herself as a divine figure, a prophet of the Black God, and led the inhabitants to worship her as Mother Miranda. Four subjects demonstrated unique reactions to the Cadou infection. Coincidentally, the descendants of the once dominant four houses, Alcina Dimitrescu, Salvatore Moreau, Donna Beneviento, and Karl Heisenberg, recognizing their potential usefulness in her work, Miranda adopted them as her own family, and they operated together as a council. Castle Dimitrescu became notorious as a place of blood and death, due to its lord's need for fresh human blood to maintain her health. Following a series of family tragedies, Beneviento isolated herself in and around her family home by an old waterfall, having implanted a Cadou parasite within her doll Angie for company. Not gaining superhuman resilience, she instead secreted a mold containment fluid, which mutated local flowers to develop intense hallucinogenic properties, luring those who strayed too close as playmates who would never return from her estate. The fishing village to the north was claimed by Moreau, who dammed the river and flooded it to allow his body to thrive while consuming wayward fishermen. Finally, Heisenberg made his home deep beneath an abandoned factory, where he would use stolen corpses from the village cemetery to mass produce an army of soldats to serve his wishes. Although he initially preferred to experiment on the dead, it was not long before he began to use living people. The four houses also notably had an obvious animosity towards each other. Dimitrescu desired to be Miranda's favorite. Beneviento never explicitly stated her misgivings, but dialogue spoken by Angie indicates a similar resentment to the other lords, such as pushing Moreau and referring to him as ugly. Moreau desired love and attention from Miranda and was obedient in following her instructions, but he didn't have a good relationship with his siblings since the other lords looked down on him. Having hated his forced mutation under Miranda, Heisenberg vented his anger by constantly arguing with the other lords and secretly plotting a rebellion against Miranda with his Soldat army. Unbeknownst to the lords, Miranda merely used them all as a means of furthering her plans to revive her long-lost biological daughter, viewing them all as expendable and false children, having created them all merely as a byproduct of her means to an end, and as such was perfectly willing to sacrifice them to her further cause. Alcina Dimitrescu was born into the noble Dimitrescu family sometime before the Great War, and through this ancestry inherited a hereditary blood disease. Although her family traced their origins to Caesar, one of the 4 founders of an isolated mountain village in Europe, Alcina herself lived elsewhere. At some point in her youth, likely in the 1930s, she had a brief music career in the emerging jazz scene, where she went by the name Miss D and played with a band called the Paul Boys. In the aftermath of the Second World War, Dimitrescu returned to her family's former lands, which had fallen under the control of a neo-pagan cult worshipping the Black God. Prior to 1958, at the age of 44, Dimitrescu was lured by the cult leader Mother Miranda to a crypt beneath the village cemetery, where she was surgically implanted with a Kadu parasite. The purpose of this experiment was to determine her viability as a candidate who could become host to a parasitic intelligence at a later date. This experiment mutated Alcina's body considerably, granting her regenerative capabilities, retractable claw-like nails, and the ability to transform into a dragon-like monster and back again. Moreover, the parasite halted her aging process, maintaining her appearance perpetually. In spite of these impressive biological changes, the resulting mutation did not nullify her blood disease. As a result, Dimitrescu needed a ready supply of fresh human blood to maintain her health, and was therefore judged by Miranda to be a failure. Although Dimitrescu was not used as a host, her claim to Castle Dimitrescu was recognized by Miranda, and she was allowed to take residence in the village as one of the 4 lords, who would maintain order over the native peasantry while aiding Miranda in Kadu research. Upon inhabiting the estate, Dimitrescu took over her family's vineyard and wine distribution business as a means of supporting herself. Relishing in her reclaimed noble status, Dimitrescu developed extreme caste-based views of society, seeing herself as second only to Miranda herself. She openly loathed the other 3 house lords, particularly Karl Heisenberg, whom she frequently argued with. She privately bemoaned that she was not Miranda's favorite, instead being treated the same as all the others. Despite this, Dimitrescu's alliance with the other houses allowed her to rule her castle with barbarous cruelty, regularly taking in new staff to replace those who had been taken to her dungeon to be killed and drained of blood for subsistence. Dimitrescu's own experiments with Kadu appear to have been limited, as the only confirmed instance was an experiment begun by Miranda and monitored by Dimitrescu. In this experiment, the corpses of 3 women were implanted with the Kadu parasites. Dimitrescu immediately formed a bond with these 3 women, whom she named Bella, Daniela, and Cassandra, and came to regard herself as their mother. Over the next 70 years, Dimitrescu and her daughters systematically consumed the flesh and blood of local peasants and servants alike. The blood of the maids was extracted and combined with grapes to create Sanguis Virginis, which was a traditional Dimitrescu family wine. The female victims, now infected with mold, lived on as Moroaica and Samca, while male victims were consumed and then hollowed out to be turned into scarecrows for the castle vineyard. Dimitrescu's reign of terror was not without resistance, however, as one villager is known to have stolen a family heirloom, which was the dagger of Death's flowers. The villager did this in an attempt to assassinate her with its poisoned blade. The attempt failed, and he was buried with the dagger in the Tower of Worship to keep it hidden from any others who might seek it to harm her. In February of 2021, Miranda's search for a viable host was finally fulfilled with the discovery of Rosemary Winters. In the early hours of Tuesday, February 9th, Miranda returned to the village with the stolen baby. Each of the 4 lords was then given possession of a flask containing a different body part of the child, with Dimitrescu being charged with guarding the head flask. With these body parts, Miranda planned to revive the baby with the mold in order to turn her into a host for her deceased daughter Eva. As considerable biomass was required to accomplish this feat, Miranda ordered the 4 lords to murder their servants and the villagers. By the end of the morning, anyone who remained in Dimitrescu's employ was brutally slaughtered or turned into a Lycan. Along with the other 3 lords, Alcina attended an emergency meeting to discuss how to deal with Ethan Winters, who had been captured and put on trial before Miranda in the houses. Alcina implored Miranda to give her custody over Winters, claiming that her daughters loved to entertain foreigners, though Miranda decided to let Heisenberg dispose of Winters instead, prompting a loud argument between Dimitrescu and Heisenberg.
Go find her food somewhere else.
Quiet now, child.
Adults are talking.
Winters managed to escape Heisenberg, and believing that Rose might be in Dimitrescu's domain, he entered the castle. Alcina's 3 daughters quickly found and subdued him, bringing him before Lady Dimitrescu herself. Although Alcina's daughters planned to consume Winters, Alcina informed them she would have to tell Mother Miranda first, and commanded them to incapacitate Winters instead, ordering them to impale both of his hands with sickle chains and suspend him from the ceiling. Prying himself free in due course, Winters traveled through the halls of Castle Dimitrescu in search of his daughter, only to be cornered by Daniela, Bella, and Cassandra throughout, eventually killing Bella and Daniela by exposing them to the cold air outside. Upon discovering her daughter's remains, Alcina demanded Cassandra to find and kill him.
Cassandra! Come here now! Enough games! I want that man's head! Now go! Of course, Mother.
In spite of the family's efforts, Cassandra fell to Winters as well, forcing Alcina to find him herself. Alcina encountered Winters trying to sneak into her bedroom, and falsely claiming that she never had Rose to begin with, pummeled him through the floor in a fit of rage, inadvertently allowing him to escape through the catacombs below. Dimitrescu followed closely behind, declaring that she would hunt him down and break him for killing her daughters, prompting Winters to defiantly snarl back at her. However, he didn't get far before having his hand sliced off by Alcina, who claimed that he would pay for his life for insulting House Dimitrescu and ending her bloodline. As Winters entered the Dimitrescu family crypt, Alcina grabbed him from behind and impaled him in the stomach with her claws. Winters counterattacked this by stabbing her in the side with the dagger of Death's flowers, but then lost the blade after being flung through a glass window by Alcina. Suffering from the effects of the unique blend of poisons in the dagger, Dimitrescu began to mutate exponentially and took on the form of a massive winged dragon-like creature. The two fought on the rooftops of the castle, with Dimitrescu's size making it difficult for her to catch him, even breaking a hole in the wall which allowed him to ascend a tower. As she began to calcify while climbing the stairs after him, Dimitrescu made one final attempt at killing Winters by pulling him down with her as she plummeted to the castle grounds below. Realizing that Winters survived the fall, she cursed his name one last time before crumbling to pieces, leaving only her crystallized remains left intact. With her death, the Dimitrescu family was ended once and for all. Donna Beneviento was born into the gentry of House Beneviento sometime during the 20th century, a family with ancestral links to Berengario, a man rumored in folklore to have been an ancient mutant who settled the region with 3 other houses from which the Dimitrescu, Moreau, and Heisenberg families are descended. Whether this feudal rule over the region was continually maintained or disappeared during the Great War is uncertain. Over the century, the Benevientos slowly fell apart. Donna's parents committed suicide when she was still a child, and with her own mental health problems undiagnosed, she would develop deep-seated interpersonal anxieties, which kept her largely isolated, preferring to talk to people through Angie, a doll made for her by her father. Donna's adulthood mostly focused on her hobby of doll making, effectively replacing her deceased family. At some point in adulthood, Donna was implanted with a Cadou parasite by Mother Miranda. Donna survived the experiment with little change in physical appearance or cognitive development, gaining the ability to secrete a psychoactive chemical which could induce extreme, even violent hallucinations in people. She was, however, judged to be a failure by Miranda, who saw her as mentally ill and underdeveloped, and a scar over her left eye would develop into a fleshy abscess. In spite of this, Donna was welcomed as an adopted daughter and given a council seat as one of the 4 lords of the village, ruling it alongside Alcina, Karl Heisenberg, and Salvatore Moreau under Miranda's oversight. This had a positive effect on her, and she would talk about it to her gardener, though she was still not able to express it without Angie. When Ethan Winters was captured by Heisenberg, the 4 House Lords held a meeting to discuss his fate. Donna stayed quiet throughout the meeting, interacting with the others through Angie. Following Ethan's battle with Alcina, he embarked on a mission to retrieve all of Rose Winters' body parts. The first area he was able to visit was House Beneviento. On the way to the estate, he unwittingly inhaled the pollen of mold-infected flowers, allowing Donna to taunt him with hallucinations of his dead wife. Upon reaching the house and traveling to the basement, Ethan came across the seemingly unattended leg flask on top of Angie. As he tried to grab it, however, Donna cut the power and the flask disappeared, along with all of Ethan's weapons. As Ethan searched for a way to escape, she taunted him with dolls resembling Mia, recordings of Mia's private thoughts, and mementos of their time raising Rose. As he searched further, he was pursued by a grotesque fetus-like monster, which echoed a baby's wails throughout the halls. It is likely that many of the things he experienced after reaching the basement, including both the monster and the loss of his weapons, were hallucinations that were created by Donna. When Ethan managed to return to the ground level of the house, Donna appeared with Angie, begging him not to leave. She sent her dolls to attack him, but he managed to fend them off. Angie hid throughout the house, instructing Ethan to find her before her friends killed him. He managed to find Angie 3 times, stabbing her with a pair of scissors each time. After stabbing Angie once more, the illusion broke and Ethan realized he had been stabbing Donna herself all along. He only caught a glimpse of her before she calcified and crumbled away, leaving behind a lifeless Angie and a piece of the 4-winged unborn key. Afterwards, a hidden pedestal with a leg flask was revealed near the front door of the mansion. Salvatore Moreau's past is shrouded in mystery, although it is known he belonged to the Moreau family, who had maintained an alliance with the noble Beneviento, Heisenberg, and Dimitrescu families for generations. The location where he dwelled, signpost Moreau's clinic, indicates either he or a member of his family were physicians prior to his mutation. Tattoos are present on his body, which is a jellyfish tattoo with mother written in the middle of his upper left shoulder, and an anchor on his left forearm. This simply implies that Moreau may have once been a sailor or fisherman during his youth. As with many others in the region, Moreau eventually became a follower of a local pagan cult and was lured by its leader, Mother Miranda, to a crypt below the village cemetery, where he was surgically implanted with a Kadu parasite. His body and mind drastically altering from the infection, Moreau mutated into a grotesque fish-like monster and was quickly judged as a failure by Miranda, as he was deemed an undesirable host for her deceased daughter's consciousness. Nevertheless, his ancient birthright was recognized and he was allowed to remain in the village as one of its 4 lords, maintaining a tyrannical rule over it. Exhibiting an almost lack of self-worth due to his grotesque appearance, Moreau flooded the entire northern portion of the village to sustain his body, feeding on unsuspecting fishermen either out of subsistence or simply for the sake of being cruel. Desperate to prove his worth to the other lords and Miranda, whom he viewed as his actual mother, Moreau conducted a number of human experiments with the Kadu, one of which would eventually result in the creation of Varcolac, though none of his experiments would be considered successful. Shortly before the arrival of Ethan Winters, Moreau attended a ritual in an abandoned cave church southwest of the village, during which Ethan's daughter Rose was crystallized by Miranda as insurance for a ceremony which would revive her true daughter. Charged with guarding a flask containing Rose's remains, Moreau worried he would be abandoned by Miranda once she resurrected her true daughter, but was determined to protect the flask due to Miranda and the other house lords looking down on him. Upon arriving at the reservoir, Ethan did not see Moreau as a threat and casually explained he was taking the flask from him. Moreau begged him to give it back, fearing Miranda and the other house lords would disown him as soon as it became known. But when Winters refused, Moreau attempted to trap him by vomiting up mucus-like enzymes blocking the exit. Despite this, Ethan quickly escaped the reservoir and made his way to the windmills, only to once again encounter Moreau. Attempting to attack Ethan in his more monstrous sea monster form, Moreau cornered him after destroying the Hound Wolf Squad station, taunting him that the only way out of the reservoir was underwater and that Miranda was already preparing for the ceremony. Vomiting large amounts of green acid, Moreau retreated into the water as he underwent further uncontrollable mutations, his original body now appearing in the mouth of his new form. As Moreau attempted to consume Ethan, he was unable to prevent him from draining all of the reservoir's water, and proceeded to pursue him into a nearby valley, where he expressed hope that he would defeat Ethan and make Miranda proud of him. However, as Moreau's body greatly inflated, he exploded in a mixture of flesh, guts, and acid, leaving only his crystallized remains behind. Heisenberg was kidnapped and subjected to the Kadu parasite experiments by Mother Miranda, who tried to brainwash him into being her servant, with only limited success. Eventually he, Alcina Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, and Salvatore Moreau became Miranda's lieutenants. Among the lords of the 4 houses, Heisenberg was the only one who held a grudge against Miranda, due to her own selfish desire to revive her late daughter at the expense of the villagers, and how she saw their family as nothing more than experiments. As such, he secretly planned a rebellion to get his freedom back, building an army of cyborg reanimated corpses and hoping to use Rose's latent powers to defeat Miranda. The Heisenberg family was closely associated with the noble Beneviento, Moreau, and Dimitrescu families, and maintained an alliance with them in controlling the region. According to sources, Heisenberg rarely strayed from his family's factory, preferring to hole himself up in its walls. Heisenberg first met Ethan as he ventured to Castle Dimitrescu, encountering him in a chamber before the castle. He noted that Ethan was an outsider, and that Mother Miranda would like him, before impaling him with a metal bar and encasing him in scrap metal. Afterwards, Heisenberg dragged Ethan to a meeting with Miranda and the other lords. At one point, he told Angie and Moreau to stop talking before belittling Lady Dimitrescu and making his case to Miranda to decide Ethan's fate. He won out, but Dimitrescu protested, to which she responded by insulting her further, before Miranda called for silence. He proceeded to put on a show for the lords, forcing Ethan to run through the mines and evade an ever-increasing number of Lycans, before finally subjecting him to a large grinder to kill him with. However, Ethan managed to escape unharmed. Almost a full day later, after Dimitrescu, Beneviento, and Moreau had been killed by Ethan, Heisenberg contacted him through a television screen 2 times, once to direct him to his flask containing a piece of rose, and again to lead Ethan to his factory. When Ethan discovered Heisenberg's wall covered with crossed out pictures of the other lords and Mia, Heisenberg made his presence known to him and told him to sit down. After forcing him to comply, he revealed to Winters that Miranda had been using him to kill each of the house lords one by one, with the intention to replace them as Miranda's sole enforcer. Knowing that he would be the next intended fight, Heisenberg instead proposed that they work together to kill Miranda, using the revived rose as a weapon. When Ethan refused, Heisenberg gave him one last chance to accept. When Ethan responded that he'll take his chances, a disappointed Heisenberg dropped him into a hole to be killed by Sturm, but Ethan manages to escape from it. Despite Heisenberg's hopes that Ethan would no longer bother him, he came back and exited the factory through the use of the machine that Chris Redfield prepared and entrusted to him. Angered that he continued to challenge him, the two engaged in combat, with Heisenberg mutating inside the metal apparatus he had created, becoming a massive cybernetic slug-like creature. Throughout the battle, Heisenberg continually taunted Ethan, prematurely claiming victory and ridiculing his attempts to kill him multiple times. The battle continued until the explosives that Chris planted detonated inside the factory, destroying it entirely and all the machines built within. Outraged at the loss of his army and factory, Heisenberg continued to fight Ethan with vigor, until he created a whirlwind of metal, lifting him into the air and attempting to kill him one last time. However, Ethan managed to grab onto the machine Chris had given him and launched its full arsenal at Heisenberg, damaging his apparatus beyond repair. Distraught, Heisenberg once more proclaimed his need to kill Miranda, after which he exploded and calcified until nothing was left of him but his crystallized remains. Lycans are the result of a human being implanted with Kudu. Originally, these people were failed test subjects for a superhuman project, intent on finding a suitable host body for the copied Eva consciousness, with Lycan being the result of the host and parasite rejecting one another due to the host's low affinity. These mutants were then cast out of the village by Miranda in order to keep the remaining townsfolk alive for future research. They then made their den in the ruins of a medieval fort, and were treated more akin to foxes, only occasionally raiding the village to kill livestock. Though there have been cases of people in 2021 becoming Lycans after being injured, it is uncertain if Lycans are capable of infecting people or if they had already been injected with Kudu eggs. In terms of intelligence, Lycans are close to normal humans in that they are capable of expertly handling weapons such as bows, riding horses, and are seen to occasionally wear crude armor. Lycans are also social creatures, and thus they hunt in packs and have a strong hierarchy where the larger Lycan appear to have a leadership role, being Urias, the biggest Lycan, at the top as expected. They are extremely aggressive and will attack their designated target they hunt on sight, except while stalking their prey. While Lycans do prey on humans, they typically consume them after some time has passed. Lycans are known to hang their prey by rope for later consumption, usually while grabbing onto the corpse. They are not picky eaters, however preying on nearly anything, including livestock, birds, and fish. In terms of physical appearance and strength, Lycans are considerably stronger than normal humans, and their distorted jaws give stronger biting force, powerful enough to easily sever limbs of their victims. They are also more agile and durable, able to take and endure multiple gunshot and stab wounds before finally going down and succumbing to death. Urias was a powerful troll-esque Lycan who served as an enforcer for Mother Miranda. Originally the chief of an Eastern European mountain community, he was infected with the Kudu parasite and transformed into a monster, along with most of the other villagers. His name is derived from the Romanian word Urias, which means huge or giant. Unlike the other Lycans, Urias' size and strength increased dramatically upon infection. This allowed him to wield a large war hammer, jump incredible distances, and toss columns with ease. Despite his size, means he possessed superhuman agility, although he wasn't quite as fast as normal Lycans. Urias is first encountered by Ethan during the initial Lycan assault at the beginning of the game. As a brute-type enemy, his attacks inflict considerably more damage than that of ordinary Lycans. He will mostly pursue the player while furiously swinging his warhammer. He returns later in the game at the Stronghold section. His attacks are mostly the same, although now he can pick up and toss nearby columns at Ethan. The witches arose at some point prior to 1958, and they were the result of human experimentation by Alcina Dimitrescu and Mother Miranda. 3 women, likely maids of Dimitrescu, were brought to the castle, put in a comatose state, and forced to become host to Kadu parasites. The Kadu, a parasitic nematode altered by the mold, then laid hundreds of eggs, out of which arose mold-derived imitations that closely resemble that of blowflies. The mold flies then consumed the human bodies and assimilated their DNA. When they completed their feast after a period of a week, they then merged together in the mold back into human form. The 3 awoke, though no longer had memories of their previous selves. Dimitrescu chose to treat the 3 as her biological daughters, and they were raised as such. Though capable of turning back into a sub-colony of imitation flies if needed, the 3 typically kept in their human forms, dining with their mother and eating food provided by the staff in the human manner. They did, however, share in their mother's need to prey on humans, and by 2021 had consumed the entire staff. Due to their ability to change form between human and an imitation blowfly swarm, the witches were for the most part immune to offensive attacks. Their only real weakness was the cold, particularly temperatures below 30 degrees Celsius. Due to the mountain climate, this restricted their hunting grounds most of the year to within the castle itself for protection. When exposed to these low temperatures, the mold enter a hibernative state which rendered them vulnerable. Severe injury while in this form could do enough damage to kill the individual. On the morning of February 9th, 2021, Ethan Winters wandered into Castle Dimitrescu looking for his daughter Rose. Of the household, it was Bella who captured him first, biting into him and then dragging him by his legs to the Countess. Though disappointed she was not given the right to consume the man by herself, the 4 hoped that they would be able to eat him together once given permission by Miranda, and he was hoisted onto a chandelier. While awaiting permission, Winters escaped captivity and was caught by Bella. Bella followed him through the underground and back up to the kitchen. During the scuffle, however, Winters fired his gun at a nearby window, exposing her to the cold air from the courtyard. With the cold forcing her body into hibernation, she became vulnerable to physical attacks and thus calcified, leaving behind her crystallized remains. Daniela later ambushed Ethan in the library. During the fight, the library's skylight was opened and she was exposed to the same cold that incapacitated her sister Bella. She was quickly weakened by Winters and her body calcified and fell apart, with only her crystallized remains left behind. As the last of the 3 daughters alive, Cassandra ambushed him later in the armory room. Cassandra sealed him inside and intent on killing him regardless, commenting that she was worried her other sisters had gotten to him first. However, Winters was able to blow open the wall using explosives and weaken Cassandra with the cold air, similar to how he had dealt with Bella earlier. The ensuing fight was when she lost and calcified. Cassandra's dying moments were of utter shock, unable to comprehend how her prey could have defeated her. Moroaica are formerly human women who died during torturous blood-draining procedures. Notes found in the dungeon shown that Alcina may have been trying to create more daughters, though they all turned out to be failures. Infected with the mold, they were revived as hollow husks of their former selves, lacking the intelligence they once possessed when they were mortal, and now seek only to feed on those around them. Thus, the Moroaica have the appearance of deformed walking corpses, with pallid skin lacking pigmentation, disfigured bat-like faces, and layers of sharp needle-like fangs they use to puncture the throats of their victims, draining them of their blood. Their fingers and toes are also elongated, giving them the appearance of claws, and they walk with a shambling gait, weakened by their lack of sustenance and abuse they have suffered, before and after the death at Castle Dimitrescu. Ingrid awakens as a prisoner within Castle Dimitrescu's dungeon, where she finds a note from a previous prisoner that gives her clues on how to escape before the witches of the castle come looking for her. Through exploration of the castle, Ingrid learns of Alcina Dimitrescu and her 3 daughters, the current owners of the castle. Discoverable notes detail how previous maids had come to the castle to work and then disappeared. Ultimately, she escapes the dungeon and enters the castle halls. Within the castle, Ingrid discovers notes which detail how Dimitrescu produces a high-quality wine line, known as Sanguis Virginis. From the torturous devices in the castle dungeon and the blood evidence in the main hall, it's heavily implied that literal maiden's blood is used in this creation. She finds the courtyard key, but is attacked by one of Dimitrescu's daughters. Although bitten, she manages to evade the pursuer and is able to reach the courtyard door and unlock it with a key. Dimitrescu appears herself to block her path, and comments how it is nice to finally meet Ingrid, before she grabs and impales her victim using large claws sprouting from her hands. After her death, Ingrid was transformed into a Moroaica by Dimitrescu. Either during or post her transformation, it was noted that she was unstable and overly alert at times, as opposed to the 3 other Moroaica who all had robust appetites. Ingrid was still roaming the dungeon beneath the castle in February of 2021 when it was infiltrated by Ethan Winters, as upon killing her in the dungeon, she drops her necklace. The Samca is a type of human mutant that arose in the mountainous region of Eastern Europe. It is a mold-infected victim of serial killer Alcina Dimitrescu, who was restored to life while suffering mental degradation and physical mutation into a feral, bat-like creature. It is named after a folkloric monster said to afflict pregnant women and young children with disease. The exact relationship between Samca and Moroaica is uncertain, but the former appears to be a further mutation of the latter, giving their similar appearances and traits. While often obscured by the hood of its ragged garment, the face of a Samca is greatly deformed, resulting in poor, if any, sight. Its tongue has grown into a long, pointed appendage used for drinking blood, similar to that of a mosquito. The most radical mutation experienced by a Samca can be seen in the arms, which have mutated into large bat-like wings. The last 3 fingers on each hand have been grotesquely elongated, and the arms themselves bent upward and are stuck at a 90-degree angle at the elbow. Fleshy membranes spread between the fingers and connect what was once the pinky finger to the Samca's lower back. Angie was built sometime in the 20th century by Beneviento's father, who was himself a doll maker. Beneviento suffered from severe interpersonal anxieties, owing to a mental health problem, but through Angie she was able to take on a new persona as the doll and speak to people. After Beneviento herself was implanted with the Kudu parasite sometime after 1996, she had part of the parasite's body surgically removed and planted within Angie. The 2 Kudu formed together a smaller colony, allowing Beneviento to command the doll to move. Due to Beneviento's hallucinatory abilities, it is uncertain if Beneviento could speak through Angie's Kudu, or if this was simple ventriloquism. The baby is a large creature resembling a hideous distortion of a human fetus. It has swollen black eyes, a gaping toothless mouth, and a slimy red body with slightly underdeveloped limbs. Its waist appears to be inverted, leaving its legs pushing backwards as it crawls forward on its hands. The result is a grasshopper-like profile. Its stomach has a large flap of loose flesh that trails behind it like a sort of limp tail, leaving bloody streaks in its wake. According to its concept art notes, the baby is technically a female organism, possibly due to being based on Rosemary Winters. It appears to be nocturnal, or at least adverse to light, since it only appears in dark areas. Despite its monstrous appearance, its vocalizations are eerily similar to those of an ordinary human baby. Its sole attack, swallowing Ethan whole, is reminiscent of a baby's tendency to put random objects in its mouth, albeit more dangerous due to its great size. The baby's exact nature is nebulous, as is common for Ethan's experiences in House Beneviento, but it was most likely an illusion created by Lady Beneviento, facilitated by the mold-infected flower pollen Ethan inhaled when he approached the mansion. It likely represents Ethan's fears about his daughter's potentially inhuman nature, and his guilt over failing to protect her from Miranda and the 4 houses. The living dolls, for the most part, appear to be normal dolls. They wear black and white clothing and appear to be based on young children. When in their attack mode, the dolls will sprout metallic spider claws, and their eyes will be surrounded by a dark color. Some dolls appear to flicker or glitch during the fight with Angie. These dolls also have the ability to float. Angie is Donna's #1 doll, who is with her at all times. During the final battle between Donna and Ethan Winters, Angie refers to the other dolls as her friends. Angie, in many ways, is far more advanced than the other dolls, being capable of holding conversations and is able to move at her own free will. Unlike Angie, these dolls don't talk, instead let out giggles when Ethan comes near them. These dolls share many traits with spiders. This may be in reference to a weaver that was described at the beginning of the game, who also had a spider-like aesthetic. This weaver is most likely Donna's distant ancestor. The living dolls make a second appearance during the Shadows of Rose DLC, where they torment Rose as she explores Beneviento's house. Urias Drac appears to be a Kadu mutated human with a greater affinity than the average subject, allowing it to grow into a hulking brute about twice as tall as an average human adult. As its name suggests, it has some physical similarities to Urias, but without the mutations seen in most Lycan variants. Instead, its body develops bloodied scars and a noticeable hunchback. It is significantly stronger and more durable than a human or even a basic Lycan, being able to wield an enormous axe while absorbing significant amounts of damage, yet its speed is still impressive. There are 2 Urias Dracs in Resident Evil Village. One will appear once the player obtains the broken slab and returns to Beneviento's treasure. The second one is located at Otto's mill, with the ability to call Samcas for backup. The name Urias Drac translates to Devil Giant in Romanian. The Varcolac were a side project of genetic engineering conducted by Salvatore Moreau, sometime after he had become one of the 4 lords, created by injecting wolf blood into the spine of a Lycan. As such, the Varcolac can be considered an offshoot of the human Lycan. Though considerably rarer than the Lycan, who treated them more as attack dogs than fellow Lycans, they were nonetheless destructive and expanded their territory into the village in 2021. The Varcolac body is a mix of human and wolf traits. Like canines, they walk in a quadrupedal gait, with hind legs that are awkwardly balanced, causing their knees to brush close to the ground as they tread on their heels. While their hands and feet appear human-like, their fingers are more elongated, resembling claws. An unusually large jaw consisting of sharp teeth tears across their skull, and their body is coated in thick hair, typically gray, which covers their spine and scalp prominently. The Varcolac is effectively animalistic in intelligence, demonstrating no higher brain function than base instincts, and relies entirely on physical strength rather than weapons, unlike the Lycans. Along with the Varcolac, there is a mini-boss in the middle of the game where we encounter the one and only Varcolac Alpha. It is a tougher variant of the Varcolac and only appears following the defeat of Salvatore Moreau. Haulers are similar to Moroaica, but appear exclusively male and were mechanically modified by Karl Heisenberg. Their craniums are attached with a headgear in order to stabilize their neural activity, similar to Soldats. Haulers are all armed with an axe made from scrapped metals. According to his notes, Heisenberg originally created the Haulers without the cranial implants, but these specimens were completely brain dead and only moved by destructive instinct. The current Haulers appear to be the 1.01 versions of the Soldats mentioned in his notes. These had headgear installed into their craniums to stimulate brain waves, allowing them to perform other tasks. However, their combat potential was non-existent compared to the Lycan, with one specimen being killed and devoured in 3 minutes. After this, it appears the Haulers were regulated to support roles, only entering combat when an intruder is detected. The Soldats were mutant humans resulting in the infestation with the Kadu parasite and mechanical modifications. Their name is derived from the German word Soldat, which means soldier. Sometime after Karl Heisenberg was bestowed his factory, he started experimenting with human corpses to build an army of mechanically modified mutants, intending to one day use them to overthrow Miranda. Using Lycans to test their combat capabilities, Heisenberg continued to modify his Soldat designs, developing increasingly advanced models to achieve the desired performance. Soldats are mutated humans experimented on by replacing their heart with a Kadu parasite. Their muscles are stimulated with electricity, however they are nearly completely brain dead. As such, their only instinct is to destroy. Their craniums are outfitted with cybernetic headgear in order to stabilize their neural activity, allowing them to follow the most basic of commands. The ones with unstable physical condition are fitted with breathing apparatus to ensure they have sufficient oxygen supplied to their body. The rest of their body is equipped with other machinery to improve their combat capabilities. Most Soldats use arm-mounted drills to impale, bludgeon, and shred their enemies. Their main weakness is the red glowing exhaust port on their chest, used to vent heat from their Kadu reactor. Unlike the other mutants infected by the Kadu, Soldats don't calcify but instead implode due to their reactor. There are several variants of Soldat encountered throughout the factory. Soldat Eins, the basic Soldat variant, with the left arm replaced by a drill. Its name Eins means one in German, referring to its single drill arm. Soldat Zwei is an upgraded Soldat Eins with both arms replaced by drills. The reactor vent has also been moved to the back. Its name Zwei means 2 in German, referring to its double drill arms. Soldat Jet is an elite Soldat with a jetpack, allowing it to make swift, lethal charges. Its head armor contains a laser sight to help it line up its dash attack. However, this can also give alert players warning to get out of the way. Soldat Panzer is a large Soldat with 3 drills on each arm, and its desired body encased in heavy metal armor. Its name Panzer comes from the German word for armor or tank, referring to its durable armored body. Sturm is a unique Soldat prototype with a massive blade propeller mounted on its torso. Its name Sturm means storm in German. Sturm is one of Heisenberg's many experiments with implanting mechanical components in the Kadu parasite into test subjects. Sturm differed greatly from other subjects. Instead of arm-mounted drills, its main weapon is a massive shredding device that replaces its head and torso, rendering it extremely dangerous in a head-on charge. However, Heisenberg considered Sturm to be a complete failure. It was practically uncontrollable and possessed very limited intelligence. At some point, it managed to lose its arms to its own propeller. As a result, Heisenberg kept Sturm in the lower levels of his factory as a guard/executioner, occasionally shouting at it to be quiet when its revving engine disturbed his train of thought.
Last time, you freak! I swear to God!
Sturm was created in the same manner as his fellow Soldats, being a human augmented with extensive cybernetics and powered by a Kadu parasite. Its most notable feature is the massive turboprop engine mounted on its torso, with 3 chainsaw blades that essentially turn it into a lethal walking rotary fan. Unlike most Soldats, its reactor exhaust was located on its back instead of the front. Despite its top-heavy design and lack of arms, Sturm seems to have no difficulty walking and running around. Heisenberg's notes describe it as having very low intelligence, although it seems cognizant enough to recognize his voice and obey his commands. The Sturm is encountered multiple times in the factory, with most encounters being chase sequences. Its final appearance is a proper battle in a series of narrow corridors. Uriaș Străjer is the older, stronger brother of Urias, both pre- and post-Lycan transformation. He is released from the mold beneath the village to battle Chris Redfield from reaching the Black God and hindering Miranda's plans. Like his younger brother Uriaș, Străjer is a human who was converted into a feral beast man by a Kadu implanted in his body, becoming significantly larger and stronger than a regular Lycan. He is unnaturally large and muscular, with a wild mane of gray hair around his face. His mutation is more severe than Uriaș, with several tendrils protruding from a large growth on his back. He also has armor-like protrusions on his shoulders and face, with the latter resembling a wolf mask. Despite Eveline's death in Resident Evil 7, the mold still continued to grow around Dolby, prompting Blue Umbrella and the BSAA to quarantine their surrounding area. 3 years later, Eveline appeared to Ethan Winters as a vision after his heart was ripped out by Miranda, claiming that he was already dead. Ethan at first believed that she was referring to his wounds, but Eveline corrected him, claiming that he had been dead long before his encounter with Miranda. Eveline revealed to him that he died after his initial encounter with Jack Baker. When Ethan demanded an explanation as to what he is, Eveline answered that his whole body was nothing but mold. Eveline mockingly told Ethan that he would never be able to see his family again, and disappeared as Ethan awoke in the Duke's carriage. Sometime after, a remnant of her consciousness has survived through Ethan, and had been absorbed by a fungal root and stored within the realm of consciousness, with her seeking to take control of the realm from Miranda. After Rose expresses her desire to know more about her dad, Michael took Rose to her childhood home, and she reads a happy half-birthday message that was left by her father Ethan. Eveline then physically appears from behind her and forcefully takes her back to House Beneviento. There she reveals to Rose that the purifying crystal is not in the house, much to Rose's dismay. Eveline tells her that if she wants to find it, she has to go much deeper, and proceeds to destroy the house and attempt to kill Rose out of envy and hatred. When Rose attempts to reach the elevator, Eveline grabs her and expresses her envy that Rose's parents should have died and joined her as a family in death. However, before she could do anything, Michael intervenes and forces her to retreat. In another part of the house, a battle ensues between Rose and Eveline. However, with Michael's help, Rose was able to suppress Eveline with her powers. In tears, Eveline began lamenting on the thought of how little value she has, which led to nobody willing to love her. When Rose approaches her, she resumes her aggression and forces Rose back. Now furious, Eveline curses Rose that it is her fault, and declares that she'll never get what she wants. Before she could unleash her full wrath, Michael, who is actually Ethan's consciousness, physically appears and saves Rose. What became of Eveline is unknown after that, as we never see her again. Face Eaters are zombie-like creatures manifested within the fungal root's consciousness. Their role is to test the husks to see if they have powers like the real Rose, draining them of their life force if they come into contact with them. Face Eaters appear as humanoids, albeit with slender, featureless bodies. They have claws and teeth, which they use to kill and eat their prey. They are fairly quick, which, combined with their jerky movements, allow them to quickly close the distance between themselves and the player. Once close, they will usually try to initiate a grab attack, which will deal significant damage. damage. Generally, it is advised to run or avoid face eaters if possible, as ammo is relatively scarce and it can take quite a number of shots to kill one. This is especially true later on in the game, where they start to appear in groups, where the player's best bet is to stun them using Rose's powers and dodge past them. The Executioner is a large creature manifested within the Fungal Root's consciousness. He serves as the Masked Duke's main minion, being sent out to kill the husks who make it too far and achieve their goal in retrieving the Purifying Crystal. Having been manifested from the consciousness of the Black God, the Executioner was given immense strength and speed, though his many heads are fused together into a singular body. His aggression would immediately increase if his weak spot had been struck a few times. Similar to Urias, he wields a heavy weapon and is big in size, though slightly smaller than the Lycan mutants. Moreover, in his second phase, the Executioner's swing attacks are faster than that of Urias, yet they are weaker. A copy of the Duke called the Masked Duke was created by the consciousness of Miranda for the purpose of finding a worthy vessel for her daughter Eva and the duplicated copies of Rose Winters. According to the Masked Duke's diary, upon his creation, his memories were broken, and he doesn't remember his identity as well as how he came into existence. All he knows is that he is sadistic in his personality, taking a liking in seeing the suffering of others. Miranda tasked him with invoking such great terrors into the Rose copies in order to pressure them into expressing similar aspects of Rose's powers. The Masked Duke is shown to command a species of monster called Face Eaters, and trying to test the duplicates and will have them killed/imprisoned if they stray too far. Upon noticing the real Rosemary, he commanded the Face Eaters to pursue her. Throughout Castle Dimitrescu, he would taunt Rose through televisions and voice intercoms as she ventures to retrieve the Purifying Crystal, which could cleanse her of her powers. At the same time, he would send in hordes of Face Eaters, as well as a large brutal monster called the Executioner. After Rose was captured and placed in a cell in the castle dungeons, the Masked Duke forced her to go through an impossible challenge in order to survive. Though she succeeded in the first part, the challenge soon became more complicated. However, with Michael's help, Rose managed to survive and escape. Later, when she finally retrieved the Purifying Crystal, the Masked Duke appears behind her and revealed that the crystal she had already gotten is merely a replica. Taking her to an unknown part of the castle's lower levels, he forced Rose to fight against the Executioner. When it failed to kill Rose, the Masked Duke was furious over its failure, calling it a useless creature and a disappointment. He then brought forth several puddles of liquid mold along with his best Face Eaters in an attempt to kill Rose herself, but she was able to escape thanks to Michael's guidance. What became of the Masked Duke is unknown, as he is never seen again after this. Mannequins are a terrifying creation manifested within the Fungal Root's consciousness, encountered in Beneviento's house as Rose explores. These creatures are unable to move when the player stares at them. Encountered in an eerie atmosphere and acting as a pursuer-type enemy, these creatures are arguably the most terrifying encounter in the game, with their sounds of skittering movements and white glowing eyes. Click this video here to find out the disturbing lore of every Resident Evil 0 enemy. Thank you for watching.